Welcome to episode 34 of the Filmumentaries podcast. It's late September 2021. This is Jamie Benning speaking to you from my superhero HQ here in southeast London. Thanks for joining me again, or maybe it's your first time. If you are new to the podcast, please go back and check out some of the previous episodes, to get the lay of the land. If you're a regular listener, then you know what's in store, a relaxed conversation between me and my guest. And for this episode, I have Gabriel Hardman. Now, Gabriel and I got in touch over Twitter, thanks to good guy Duncan Fegredo. I didn't actually know about Gabriel's work, but after some quick searching online, I found I was, in fact, aware of some of his work. He's a comic book artist and writer. He's also a very sought-after storyboard artist. So I got in touch with Gabriel, and immediately it was obvious that he was a good guy and he was willing and able to come on the podcast to talk about his work. So we spoke a few weeks ago now over Zoom again. Having seen some of his storyboards, I was keen to ask him about the process that he goes through to create them, when he's brought on board, when he finishes the job, and I was quite surprised by some of the answers actually. I also wanted to talk to him about his comic books, and as part of my research I read one of his Aliens comic books, which was really good actually. I thought he had a really good grasp of the medium and was able to create a tense atmosphere for the reader. There's a great opening scene in Aliens Dust to Dust, which shows he's clearly adept at using the elements of cinema and comic book artistry hand in hand. I was on the edge of my seat actually. I thought it was really impressive. So before we get to my conversation with Gabriel, I just wanted to say a big thank you to all of my lovely patrons on Patreon, patreon.com/Jamie Benning, for supporting me in doing this podcast. I really, really do appreciate it. It means a lot. I got a new patron today, my 64th, and I sent him a message just to say how much I appreciated it. It's been a pretty difficult time at home at the moment, and it really did lift me this morning to know that people are enjoying this and they're willing to support me financially as well. And it does make a big difference to how I approach it and the effort that I put in. So I really am grateful to all of you for doing that. So please keep it all coming, whether you sign up on Patreon or you share on social media, subscribe, comment, give me feedback, leave reviews. All of that kind of stuff is going to help bring my small little independent podcast to the front. There's a lot of big companies now in the podcast space, a lot of big celebrities doing their thing. And as usual, the independent ones are being kind of buried. So anything you can do to help me to get it out there would be fantastic and very much appreciated. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Gabriel Hardman, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. So Gabriel, how and when did your aptitude for illustration develop?
I was, my mother was a fine artist. I was raised around, art and museums, and that was always a part of my life. I was always drawing. There was never a time when that wasn't something for me. So, and I ended up going to a high school that was sort of where half the day was focused on fine art. So I had from when I was 14, I had like a kind of college level education in art that was enormously helpful to me. Certainly, particularly some elements of it that just don't even seem like they would be just like critical thinking in the art history class and stuff like that was as important to me as anything, and certainly better than anything I learned in the regular high school. And it was always a thing. I ended up I graduated a little early from high school. I went straight to New York City to go to School of Visual Arts, which I went to for a semester and then ran out of money and couldn't keep going. So, but it actually was not that big of a deal because I felt it felt remedial. I had been having this kind of that level of art education for years in high school already. So it was like kind of starting over when I got to SVA. So I dropped out and I did other things. I mean, I started I was a security guard at the Guggenheim for almost a year. I was really young, too young to be doing that. And I was like 18 years old. And I had steadily been trying to draw comics for a living. Since I was like 14 years old, I had been sending in submissions to comic book companies trying to get sending sequential sample pages in and trying to get work doing that. By the time I was like 18, I did. That was, and I drew Marvel Comics for a couple of years there. Which also living in New York City didn't pay the bills. So so I started scheming for something else, which was doing storyboards for movies. And so just moved out to Los Angeles with the idea that somehow that would work out with no plan. And I was still doing little comics at the time. And then I just kept telling people, while making no other real concrete effort to be a storyboard artist, I kept telling people I was going to be one. And then I was at a book signing. I ran into or like the other guy in line in front of me at a book signing. I said the same thing, like, oh, I'm doing these comics, but I want to do storyboards for movies. And he's like, oh, well, I know an agent who represents storyboard artists. And and he gave me the guy's number, whatever, and I called him up. He's like, well, show me some samples. I'm like, I didn't have any samples. So I just made that night I sat down and just drew out this sequence that I had kind of been, something I'd kind of been thinking of. Basically, I drew out an action sequence set in the rotunda of the Guggenheim, like after, spending so much time just standing around there, imagining, scenarios of people getting, shot and thrown over the edge of it. I just kind of, invented a little sequence for that, went in there. He was like, this stuff is good enough. He started getting me some jobs in commercials and stuff. And then I just, kind of ended up having a career through that, obviously huge film fan, and spent like so much of my time just learning about filmmaking. Hitchcock Truffaut is like a book that like changed my life. Francois Truffaut's interview book with Alfred Hitchcock, particularly just because, all of this, the comics and, the filmmaking stuff is all, it's not so much about the drawing, it's about the storytelling. It's about the visual storytelling of it all. And, and thinking about that stuff, based on a lot of other filmmaking stuff that I'd read, but particularly Hitchcock and suspense and that way of thinking through visual storytelling, cinematic storytelling, that was such an enormous influence on me that when I actually got around to, it felt like I conned my way into these jobs or whatever, but, and I still had tons to learn and was faking my way through it. But I also found, all these things that I've been reading about for years are super valuable when it comes to, to working on this stuff. And it's not that I don't know what I'm doing. I'm just, just catching up, all the stuff that that was just me, like being obsessed with movies, turned out to be very valuable when I worked on movies.
Cool. So what were the movies that kind of influenced you the most as a kid? Because you've got a really kind of gritty, kinetic kind of style to illustration. Was there any sort of seminal moment in cinema for you that kind of jumps out?
Certainly Raiders of the Lost Ark. I mean, there's no question about it. I was like 7, 8 years old. I saw it a bunch of times. It was huge for me. I mean, Star Wars was as well, but I mean, the first one came out when I was 3, and it didn't have, like, Raiders hit me at a time where I could understand that it was a film, right? It was a movie, so like, I wanted to be like a archaeologist for like 5 minutes, and then I was like, no, I want to, like, then I think I saw the behind the scenes thing or something on television. It's like, oh no, I want to be the guy who made the damn thing, so that definitely was huge for me. But I mean, so also a lot of those, like, I grew up in the 80s, a lot of those movies, Back to the Future, all of that stuff influenced me. But then I also got super pretentious about it all by the time I was like, 15. And then I'm like all, it's all, Godard and whatever, and but a lot of Hitchcock and a lot of classic Hollywood stuff, classic film noir movies out of the past, Double Indemnity, Detour, that sort of stuff. That made a huge impact on me as well, and certainly aesthetically.
Did you have any kind of mentors that you had a sort of personal relationship with, or even people that you regard as mentors that you didn't even ever meet? Who were the people you looked up to?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of people that I look up to, just, particularly just, as directors and storytellers and stuff. I mean, obviously Hitchcock, obviously, I'm not allowed to talk about this guy anymore, but Roman Polanski is a huge one, just because, however terrible a person he is, he's an unbelievably brilliant director. And, and Kubrick and nobody terribly surprising, but like as far as actual work is concerned, one of the early jobs I did, well, actually, let me just say that that there were a few earlier people that I worked with who like made an impact on the way that I like understood how filmmaking worked and understood how to apply some of those ideas that I had to it. The very first feature that I worked on was the first Austin Powers movie. I was 22. I was working with Jay Roach, who's the director, and Mike Myers, who was very heavily involved in there all the time. And that was just a formative experience in it was my first real movie experience. And it was the first time that I was, it wasn't just like, doing a commercial for a day or two and, being gone. It was a big, long process of developing the movie. Then, and then I also worked with this guy called Rob Bowman, who directed the X-Files movie. And, he had a very particular, he came out of television, but he had cinematic aspirations. He had really clear ideas about telling a story. I learned a lot of, sort of storytelling rules from him. A lot of what I learned and used, going forward, it's not from, I didn't learn stuff from Christopher Nolan or from, whoever later on. You're expected to just, know your job and be doing it by that point, right? Most of the nuts and bolts things I learned and still think about are from these early people that I worked with who were, somebody maybe a little more journeyman, whatever, but they kind of gave me the solid foundation to move forward. The one other guy who was, who was big for me was Nilo Rodis, who worked on, you know who he is.
I interviewed him, for this podcast. Yeah,
exactly. The second movie I worked on was Flubber. Not exactly a movie everybody, remembers fondly, or perhaps at all. But but for me, it was I shared an office with Nilo. This like huge office on at these buildings that were like converted into sound stages on Treasure Island in San Francisco, the island between in the middle of the bay, and it was such like Nilo had, and I highly recommend, anybody go back and listen to your interview with Nilo, because that was basically all the stuff that I got, right? Like a lot of his kind of, a more philosophical approach to this stuff. I don't think Nilo likes movies. He doesn't, he's certainly, I'm the nerdy Star Wars fan, and he was like, "Oh, you like those movies?" Like, obviously sort of messing with me, but but still, but he had just an approach to stuff that that was so kind of counter to what to the very nuts and bolts sort of way that that I learned other things, and so I don't know, keeping some of that his slightly more ethereal ideas about, approaching stuff and approaching material and everything. That's also been really important to me.
What I liked about Nilo was, despite the fact that he's had this long career doing what he's done and, he's worked on these big movies and everything else, he's not particularly, there's nothing cynical about him. He still sounds young. There's a freshness in his voice. And, you kind of, everybody that has given me feedback has just said, I've just kind of fallen in love with this guy. Like, I want to hear more from this guy.
Absolutely. Yeah, I know. I feel like, I mean, he's one of those guys, but like, that people, would, you turn to and get something from and everything. But he's also just, I don't know. It feels like he's also like a step removed from this whole business and everything, as well. Like he's certainly not a Hollywood guy.
So he's like the Yoda of the industry. So
it's hard not to say that, but people say that all. I've heard people say that all the time.
Yeah. I was reading this morning.
Yeah,
and I'm yet to read this. So I've got in my hands here Aliens, Dust to Dust, and Agents of Atlas. Now, one of my good buddies, is a doctor of film studies and the biggest comic fan I know. He's been trying to convert me to be a comic fan for many years now, with some success. He loves movies and he loves comics, but he often says to me, "Oh, that comic's never going to work as a movie, or that movie's never going to work as a comic. They only work in their original medium." So what is it about a comic book artist like yourself that's so valuable to the movie industry? What do you bring for those directors?
I mean, I think that since for me, I'm sort of, the movie stuff has influenced my comics as much as the other way around. So, it's definitely a hybrid of things. I mean, I think that a big part of this is, I don't know that the comics were a huge influence on the film work that I did in the early part of my career. The early comics that I did, I was just drawing them. I was just, I wasn't really involved in the storytelling of it. But the comics career I've had and I didn't do comics for many years, and then went back to it about 10 years or so ago, but now I write and draw everything for the most part, right? So I think that a huge part of what I'm bringing to it is a more holistic idea of storytelling, right? I mean, I'm thinking about scenes. I'm not there to I mean, for the most part, I'm not even there to just illustrate a shot list from the director. I very rarely get shot lists from directors, or a huge amount of input in the first place. Really, most of the time I'm either there's no script and I'm just going off of the vague idea of a sequence, or there's a script and I'm working off that and I'm pitching ideas to the director. So it's a very organic process in that way, and and it's just very rare that I'm I can't even. The last time I got a shot list from a director was years ago. I mean, a lot of what I do is to come in and try to like develop action sequences and develop even non-action sequences, just visual sequences. And so I think that the what I'm bringing from, writing and drawing comics is just a sense of storytelling, a sense of visual storytelling, and a level of draftsmanship, which can be nice, I mean, but it's also to some extent, the necessity for that is dependent on the project, right? Some directors really just want the roughest, quickest thing, a suggestion, and some want, beautiful keyframes, and I like when I was first working with Jim Mangold in recent years, he really wanted, I would start on the movies, and and he loves just like very noirish keyframes, things that create a mood and set, and inspire stuff as it goes forward, inspire visuals, inspire the script, inspire everything, So bring just that kind of the flexibility to be a storyteller, but also someone who can draw illustrative, atmospheric stuff, I think is what it is.
Yeah, and I guess with comic books and sort of having a grounding in that and then returning to it, you don't have the kind of devices that filmmakers have to kind of manipulate our emotions, like sound effects and music and genuine movement. So doing comic books in the way that you do and storyboards in the way that you have done them, do you think that gives you sort of a better understanding of how framing and movement really drive our emotions.
Yeah, because I mean they are very. I mean your friend is correct in that they are very separate forms, right? And and the way that comics are like haiku. You have such you have to pick exactly the right moment, and you have to convey everything through these couple of juxtaposed moments over the course of a page. The film is much more elastic. Obviously, there's movement, there's all of the other things, but there's still really basic core storytelling things they have in common, and it's still about it's about the visual storytelling, and it's about getting across the emotion and all the other stuff you're talking about, but just in different forms.
And I was sort of reading around some of the kind of theory behind comic book about the white space, the gutter between the images, and how, what you do gives us that space to fill in the gap. So if there's somebody drawing their fist back and in the next frame there's contact, then we've kind of drawn the gap in between. Do you kind of strive to help directors understand the need to leave some gaps? Because I think sometimes movies just fill in every gap and we've got nothing to kind of, use our imagination for.
I am always the person who is arguing for cutting things and
yes.
for that. Why do we need this scene is something that comes out of my mouth a lot. I absolutely am at odds with the current fashion in Hollywood to over-explain everything and to not leave room to imagine stuff. I mean, exactly what you're saying about the form of comics is exactly right. I mean, the gutter between the panels is a cut, basically. It's both comics and film are about a juxtaposition of images, right? It's the way a shot in a film reacts to the next shot, and creates a third idea. That's the same thing in comics. It's a panel, and then the following panel. You put those two things together in your head, and it creates this kind of third idea of movement forward. And I mean, it's doing it subliminally in a lot of ways in films, but it's still about the basic unit of visual storytelling of two images being smashed together. So I think that it's valuable to think of it in that way, and I absolutely am somebody who is more attuned towards a kind of minimalism or something like both holding back, but also look, we're talking about this cutting business. It is unfashionable to cut in movies now, right? Everybody lies to themselves that it's super impressive to have these long uninterrupted shots because that's going to the audience is going to be super impressed by this. It's like, I don't think that they should be noticing that at all, and B, virtually the same note. They shouldn't be noticing that at all. They should be like if somebody is sitting there going, wow, I'm so impressed. I wonder how they did this. I'm so impressed by this shot in this movie. They're not watching the movie. They're not involved in the movie. It's decadence. It doesn't you can do this stuff. Brian De Palma, has done these kind of shots forever, and he does it effectively in his own way. But I don't really think that's I think the fundamental part of one of those fundamental parts of filmmaking is the cutting and the impact you can get from cutting and the creation of ideas by stringing the shots together and following somebody around. I don't think is great filmmaking. I think that that it has to be about the way the images develop.
Mm. Yeah, I'm not going to leave this in the podcast, but my next question was, how do you navigate the current habit of directors to have long one-ers that call attention to themselves? As a comic book artist, do you prefer a cut? Yeah, because I was watching Touch of Evil, the version that Walter Murch kind of cut back together based on Orson Welles' notes or his memo, all those years ago, and of course that famous opening shot. But I guess in a film like that, and in some cases those oneers do reveal the space to us. Like I know it's not a oneer, but in the opener of Alien, you know, we have the ship revealed to us, and it reveals our world for the rest of the film. Now that I don't mind so much, but I found 1917 kind of tiresome. It just felt like some sort of Hollywood masturbation, basically.
Yes, yeah, I think that's correct. But but I absolutely think that that you can do anything. You can use any technique, right? Like, I don't think there's anything that you can't use if you can make it work or if it's appropriate for the moment. And I'm not arguing with Orson Welles. I mean, and also, you know, even more so than the opening shot of Touch of Evil, the shot in the interrogation shot in the apartment where Charlton Heston ends up going into the bathroom and seeing that there was not actually, you know, a bomb in the box where they claim to have found or the dynamite in the box where they claim to have found it. And that's just one that we just go back and forth with them. But I'd seen that movie a million times, and I don't think I hadn't even noticed that it was in one until much later, you know, and I'm very attuned to this stuff. So, I think that it's about, you know, if you're sitting there going, oh, this movie's all in one shot, or this giant long sequence is so impressive that it's all in one shot, then I think that's a failure of the film.
Yeah, I spoke to Walter Murch last week and the week before for the podcast, and he, of course, talks about the blinking being our sort of nature's editing when we blink from one thing to the next. And what those one-shots and films like 1917, I hope there aren't many more of them, what they failed to recognise is that we're still blinking, so we're still editing the film as we're experiencing it as well. But you talked about your kind of education in film and being surrounded and immersed in kind of film theory and things. Do you think in terms of lenses when you're drawing your storyboards?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I mean, I think in terms of every practical element of actually shooting the thing, you know, all of that's become so much more fluid in a digital world. Because it used to be that you needed to plan for something you can actually shoot on some level. That's a little bit less the case now. But I do think about every practical element that goes into it. I don't do work that you couldn't actually make. I mean, there's no point in that. Yeah, I absolutely approach it thinking about all that stuff. And then, you know, and for the most part, what I'm doing is also contacting department heads, having meetings about elements of, you know, the production design, what kind of truck is this? How is that gonna, you know, like, you need to know all of that stuff, as much of that stuff as possible. Often I'm, you know, starting before almost anybody, one of the first people on a movie usually. So there's almost nothing to go on in the very beginning. But, and then I'm sure some of my dumb choices end up influencing things down the line. But but it really is that as things get going, you got to talk to locations. You got to talk to the art department. You got to talk to, to all these people to know that what you're doing is actually usable, and you're not only that, if there's some particular truck that they're going to use, then, you know, there may be visual opportunities there that you're missing if you don't, if you're just living in some little dream world and, doing a lot of pretty storyboards that nobody will ever use.
I was, what was I listening to the other day? Oh, it was Roger Deakins' podcast, the Team Deakins podcast. Mm-hmm. And I see that him and his wife have interviewed just about, everybody you can think of on the kind of upper echelons of movie production. Yeah. There's no interviews with storyboard artists. And I wondered, actually, is there a conflict between cinematographers and storyboard artists?
Yeah. If there's anybody on a show who always gives me the cold shoulder, I mean, not always. There are people who don't. But it is almost always the case that there is that there's a level of I don't want to say threatened, but being threatened by anybody else having a say in what the visuals are, and that often can be a kind, if not a conflict, a sort of, they're going to ignore me and whatever, that happens. That said, look, Peter Deming was on that podcast that you're talking about recently. he's great. I've worked with him on stuff. There are people who are not like that. I'm painting with a broad brush, but at the same time, it is something that I've run into over and over again.
Yeah, I guess, the difficulty is that if it's all boarded so heavily, there's sort of no flexibility, no space for creativity for them, maybe in their mind.
Well, I mean, they do like the movie and actually shoot it, but but it still is that. That's one of the things, though, about preparation, about storyboards or about previs, animatic type previs, it's only limited. I mean, maybe there are some ways that it can limit you, like a director, politically, like if the producers of the studio want to pin them down and say, this is exactly what you're going to do, or those are their expectations, and they can look at the boards and go, this is all you're going to get. You can only shoot this. But for the most part, I think that the idea that somehow, previs, but definitely that boards supersede your ability to adapt when you're on set, to adapt to things that to new things that come along and change stuff. I mean, I don't know who the director is who can't think beyond looking at a piece of paper, right? Like, you're there, things are happening. It's about, the boards are a starting point. The script is a starting point, you get it on its feet, and there are things, working with the actors, different things will come up, and it's not, and it's never going to be exactly that thing on the page. All of this stuff is about developing the ideas, but the final, and you're rewriting the film at every stage, shooting it is rewriting it, editing is rewriting it, and so it's all a developing process, and nothing is ever set in stone that way.
Yeah, I wonder if it's something to do with, well, I spoke to a second unit director, Peter McDonald, who worked throughout the sort of 70s and 80s and 90s, and he kind of told me, I think I included it in the podcast, I'm sure he won't mind me saying, that he worked with a lot of directors who didn't have a clue how to direct. They were just brought on because they had some name or some connection somewhere. And so therefore he was kind of maybe tied to the storyboards, from a camera point of view, because the director couldn't think outside the box. So maybe sometimes your work does kind of, is kind of etched in stone.
Well, there are certainly times when that's the case, and there are certainly times when I've had, situations with perhaps lesser directors where I have done, worked out entire sequences with no input whatsoever from them that have made their way all the way through the process. And I mean, that's also when, there was more often now I just do boards, and don't supervise previous stuff. That becomes a whole middle management job that I got kind of tired of. But there was a period of time where I was nominally doing boards, but mostly just working with previs artists and directing what they did, and kind of creating an animated sequence that we would present to the director, whatever. And there have been a couple of times with directors where that would turn into me just doing coming up with and supervising an entire big sequence, presenting it to them, and then no changes happen, and it just makes it all the way through. That's certainly not the case with the better, stronger directors that I've worked with.
Yeah, you mentioned previs there, and it is an important part of the process. But I've never seen any previs that isn't really just about the mechanics of the shot. It doesn't convey the emotion, which is what storyboards, somebody as talented as yourself, can bring the emotion to that. I guess that's the value of having somebody like you doing storyboards.
It is a huge part of what I do. I mean, and it's and something that we run into a lot. And I work closely with previs, but but very often, certainly if there's a sequence that is very reliant on reactions and, being in the moment with the characters more than the big mechanical visual effects aspects of stuff. Not running down previs, it's a great tool, and I work with previs people all the time. But it also does lack a kind of emotion. I mean, there's, you just, only because, there just isn't the time to animate these sequences in ways that are, and like, it's unnecessary, but also just a time thing of, you're not going to get reactions from the characters and all the nuances that you would need to just express something. I am bringing that level of it in the boards. It's about, it's about little, I can do little interactions between characters. I can do little glances and expressions and stuff like that in a way that previs can't.
Yeah, I was looking through some of your storyboards, and you've clearly got a talent for, and your comic work as well, you've clearly got a talent for conveying emotion on the face of characters, even if it's like some of the broader stroke stuff like on Logan, or if, I was reading Aliens Dust to Dust this morning, some of the reactions of Max, the protagonist there, you've clearly got a talent for doing that. I wondered if because you're clearly respected for your kinetic storytelling and very talented and doing these refined facial features and things, but have you ever been brought onto a project to kind of fulfill the obsession of a director to get the likeness of somebody in a storyboard? Whether it's to kind of court somebody for the job. I think, for instance, I think some of the early Blade Runner storyboards had like Dustin Hoffman in them.
Right.
Whether it was to get him on the project or whether it was after the process. But have you ever come across that before?
Usually not. I mean, usually it's, it's not like I'm not trying to do, some level of likeness of an actor if it's a known actor. I mean, or if I'm working on a film where it's the actor is the reason it's happening, and they've certainly, if they've played that character before, I will definitely, work to have it feel like that actor and get a likeness of them across, but it's not paramount. It's not that, that's generally not the biggest issue. The main place I've run into that sort of thing is doing commercials, which I don't do anymore. So, it was earlier in my career. At one point, a producer on a commercial literally yelled at me in the middle of an office for drawing little crow's feet on the actresses, around the actresses' eyes in a commercial, right? And mind you, they just gave me photo reference, and I was like, all right, well, that's what she looks like. I'll draw it, right? And I was young and naive, and so my preference would be to not be in circumstances like that. It's working on films is more it's a lot more nuts and bolts, and it's a lot more about telling the story than it is about the vanity of the actors or anything like that.
Well, that's encouraging. When you're researching for a film, I'm thinking an example, Ford versus Ferrari, which I saw a few years back when it came out. Did you kind of have to immerse yourself in the motorsport world to kind of understand? Did you even? I work in motorsport TV. Did you watch any race coverage to kind of get a sense of what people might expect in terms of the framing of the car and how you might tell a story with a car?
I think less so. What we were immersed in was the world of Le Mans in 1966, right? And I think that while a lot of what we ended up doing with the camera during the racing sequences was certainly more dynamic than what could have been done in 1966. Jim Mangold, the director, was concerned that we weren't out to make a big sweeping sort of a Fast and the Furious type CGI shots. Everything was meant to feel very practical and very real because it's a character-based movie, and we want to be there with the driver, with Christian Bale, and viscerally feel what it's like to be out there with them on the track, more than having having just sexy shots with the camera swooping around just for the sake of it.
Well, I have to say that I've worked in motorsport for 20 years, and of all of the motorsport films there've been over the years, that is the one that people who are in the industry go, they've got it right there. There's something about they've done right there. So congratulations to you.
I really like that. I really like that movie.
Yeah, it was good.
I'm happy to have worked on it. I certainly can't say I really liked that movie about like every movie I work on. but that one, that one and Logan, and I've enjoyed working with Jim.
Yeah, he's a good director. I'm looking forward to his next one.
Okay.
Do you talked about being one of the first people brought on a project, to kind of even if it's not scripted at that point, just to get some kind of broad impression of the feel and the look of the movie. I've seen as well, and you've talked about it before in other interviews, where you then have been an illustrator on a movie. Have you ever gone from being a storyboard artist on the same movie that you then become an illustrator on, and what is the difference?
I mean, an illustrator is more someone who works for the production designer in the art department, and it's more about visualizing, sets or augmented locations or, vehicles and props and all that sort of stuff. I've spent a lot less time doing work as an illustrator in that capacity. I mean, much more. I mean, I'm a storytelling guy, right? Like, people look to me for visual storytelling. And so the majority of the stuff I do is, even as an illustrator, leans more towards, something that would express an actual shot in the film. And, so it's, when you talk about, a concept artist or something for films, I'm so much less interested in the kind of, minutia of design and all of that stuff. Not that it's not great, and not that I'm not interested in a broad sense, but as far as actually doing it, it doesn't interest me that much. I'm about how do we tell this story, and how do we tell this story visually, and I am really not about the industrial design of a space gun or whatever. I really would. There are people who are obviously amazing at that. Although the fact that there have been that it's a sort of fashionable idea to be a concept artist now, and there are these classes and schools, has had I think a detrimental effect on it all. Having going back to the Nilo Rodis thing. I mean, him coming into this stuff from a very different perspective of his industrial design experience or whatever, but not someone who was versed in the sort of design cliches of movie, and a lot of those didn't exist even at that point. And he and Joe Johnston were inventing those cliches, or what would become cliches. But I do think that the entire thing of of a uniformity of design that you see over and over and over again has not been a great thing for movies.
I was encouraged by Twitter, I think it was this morning, to follow the word concept artist, and it showed like 6 or 7 artists showing their work. And as I flicked through, I thought it was the same artist. They all looked exactly the same.
Yeah.
So whatever they're teaching it in too refined a way, because they're falling into all of those kind of typical tropes and cliches.
Yeah, I think just watching the movies will tell you that that's a little bit of an issue. Every single superhero movie has some sort of a big giant circular machine at some point. I mean, it's like these concepts just don't. It's bred by familiarity. People want often are attracted to things that are familiar while not exactly realizing why they're attracted to them. So instead of pushing for, this is not the case across the board, obviously, but it is an issue. I think that people a recognition factor kind of like supersedes your taste, right? And you end up going, oh, I like that, I'm not sure why, but in reality it's because it's familiar. So then the familiar thing keeps getting reprocessed over and over and over again.
Yeah. I said to you, I think yesterday or the day before, when I was going through some of your work, that I consider you to have a superpower. Forget all of the superheroes that you've drawn. I'd love to be able to do what you do. Unfortunately, I don't have the sort of innate talent, and I don't have the patience to commit, I don't think. But one thing I like to talk to about with people, and it is a bit of a crap question, but I like the varying range of answers, is that what do you do to get into your creative zone? Do you listen to music? Do you get outside? Do you Google and doodle? Or how does it work for you?
I do tend to just, I mean, I feel like in some ways there are two parts of it. I mean, I will listen to music when I'm, when I'm conceiving of a sequence, when I'm trying to work it out, like work out these ideas, I'm more likely to listen to music and not have distractions. And because it's more like writing, right? You're like the thinking work of what I do is the important part of it. And that's the part where I have to be really focused. Drawing it is, while, sometimes particular things are a challenge, for the most part, that's, that's a more like, it's Five Easy Pieces. It's there's this movie, Five Easy Pieces, with Jack Nicholson from the '70s, where he was a concert level pianist, but gave it up, and he plays this beautiful piece for this woman, and she's very moved by it. And he's like, I played that. There was no emotion there. I played it when I was 5, right? Like it's there's a level for the drawing at this point where it's like just drawing the stuff is just executing the ideas, and that part's relatively easy. The hard part is figuring it out. The hard part is the thinking work behind how to tell the story in these shots, and how and where, and finding finding the moments of suspense, finding the moments where the characters are interacting and reacting to each other, and having and designing a sequence that exploits those things. That the thinking part of these of designing sequences is the important part. The drawing it part, it can be, me, I worked with Christopher Nolan on a couple of movies, and he very much wanted the storyboards to be very rough and very, quick and expressive, and specifically drawn in pencil. And so
why was that? What was the reason behind the pencil? Was it the analog obsession of his?
Yes, but so look, so I worked with him on the first movie I worked with him on was Inception, right? And look, I don't know if anybody's noticed this, but Chris Nolan's a little bit of an imperious guy, and so like he, at the beginning, on my first interaction, I had a meeting with him to see about getting the job, and whatever, he gave me the job, whatever. My first actual meeting with him, after, on first day, I read the script, and he asked me, this is Inception, and he was like, so did you read the script? I was like, yeah, of course, I read it twice. Did you understand it? Like, dude. Like, I mean, like, he's like that. But he also was very particular about wanting me to draw on paper in pencil, right? I mean, this is in a world where everybody's moved on to fully digital stuff, right? Just because of practical reasons, because of the pipeline, because it's, nobody's sitting around scanning pages, anymore. And so, whatever. I think it is because of the discipline of it. I think it's the fact that you have to, if you're committing to something, you're going to have to erase it if you want to change it. It's, I think it very much is about that kind of, analog discipline. So I did I did Inception, that third Batman, and then Interstellar. When I went back for the Batman movie, I was like, if I drew the boards digitally, I think it would save some time. And he just glared at me from across the desk and said, "You're fooling yourself." Whatever. That said, by Interstellar, perhaps I just started drawing them digitally with a pencil in Photoshop, and Chris Nolan couldn't tell the difference. So,
And given that your style is about texture and atmosphere, and particularly in the comic books, do you draw with pencil initially with the comic illustrations?
yeah, I mean, the kind of classic way to draw a comic is that you'll draw it in pencil, and then sometimes in the sort of factory world of how they used to make comics, you would that one guy would draw the pencils, a different guy would ink over that, so that it was slick enough for reproduction, and then someone else would color it. Now it's a much more organic thing because of the digital stuff. But in comics, I still I basically do very little of it digitally. I go out of my way in comics to draw on paper, I do pencil the stuff, but I actually do it quite loosely. I mean, the enormous amount of drawing that I've done over my career. I mean, doing storyboards is not about doing precious stuff. You literally put weeks and weeks and weeks of work into something that can be just thrown away at any moment, because a set changed, or there's been some, or money or script or something, just for having nothing to do with the quality of the sequence. Your work can just get, tossed at any moment, and then you just do it all again, and you do massive amounts of stuff. So, when I came back to comics, my ability to not have to, work out every single element in pencil and before moving on to inks. I mean, I will very loosely pencil the comics and then just dive in, with ink, with a brush and ink and texture and a razor blade and any other damn thing, a sponge, whatever, to get texture and to get, to create all that stuff. In the storyboards and the film work, I mean, I work all, in Photoshop, but I still often kind of strive to have that, the feel of ink, the feel of, some of my favorite boards ever are those, or there's some from Vertigo, and there's some from that I have, that Ted Howarth, the art director on Strangers on a Train, did. That there's these ink wash boards that are very evocative. Mm-hmm. And so I always wanted to, I always liked the idea of having that level of atmosphere. Really couldn't get around to doing stuff like that until digital, drawing digitally, because it was, just impractical to do atmospheric storyboards and stuff back when, like ink wash, moody storyboards back when you had to send things through a fax machine or they would get copied a million times. Yeah. Nobody would even be able to see what they were. I mean, I remember one time, there's a well-known storyboard guy, David Lowery, who worked with Spielberg on Jurassic Park and all these movies. And one time I was looking through a book and one of those Hitchcock behind the scenes type books, and those very beautiful Vertigo boards were in there, and I was like, God, I'd love to do some like this. And he was like, you can't do boards like that. They would never fax. And this was obviously a long time ago. This was early in my career. But that we don't have to worry about the fax machine anymore, right? I can do them as atmospherically as I like.
Nice. I was thinking about, because you did the storyboards on Jurassic Park 3, right? And that was Joe Johnston directed that?
That is correct. Yeah.
So Joe obviously is a very talented illustrator himself, concept, storyboard, everything else. Because I spoke to Sylvain Desprez, who did storyboards for Ridley Scott for a number of years, and kind of asked him the question about what's it like working for somebody who can kind of match you in terms of illustration. What was it like working with Joe?
Well, I mean, that was actually that was still pretty early on in my career. I mean, it was 2000, 99, something like that. And I think I was relatively intimidated by the idea of working with Joe Johnston, but he was very open to stuff. And he was, he's a very easygoing guy in a lot of ways. So, that actually, Dave Lowery was on that as well. That may have actually been where where my Vertigo comment was was taken so poorly, and also Rodolfo DiMaggio was on there, who's basically like one of the greatest draftsman I've ever been around, and so I was already in a circumstance where even the other guys that I was working with were particularly intimidating on that one. So, but Joe is very open to things, and not he was never, in my experience, never somebody who would impose his ideas in some heavy-handed way. I didn't have a remarkably different experience working with him, than other directors. In that
Apart
sense.
from Chris Nolan.
Well, sure.
Have you ever been tempted to publish your work in a book? Because looking through the stuff you've done, I sorry to keep bringing up previous guests on my podcast, but I was speaking to Dan Perry, who's the titles designer, and he's kind of known not for a signature style, but for being able to adapt kind of chameleon-like to the director's needs. And you seem to have that as well, looking through some of the boards that I found of yours. And to me, it feels like there's a book there,
I think that's probably true. I have been approached by it. If anything, it's a little bit of a self-defeating thing on my part, because I don't care about the past and always just want to move on. And, and so the idea of compiling this book of all this stuff is like, oh God, like like that just sounds so terrible to me. But I can also understand how it would be of value to me. Perhaps that's something that can happen. I've been approached about it before. Maybe it's something I should more seriously look into.
Mm. You've written and illustrated your comics, and given that in the comic books you're kind of director, your writer, your production designer, your cinematographer, editor, where's your film? Like, why are you not directing movies right now?
We'll see. I'm the actually doing the comics was sort of a reaction to not being able to get films off the ground, right? Like I was, I'm not, to some extent, my taste doesn't perfectly align with the contemporary stuff, and we were going into a place where, the only movies that were made were either $100,000 budget movies or $100 million budget movies, and there was nothing in between. So, which is a challenge to a degree. That's changing somewhat now because of different opportunities from streamers and stuff like that. But but ultimately, me going back into comics had everything to do with me being frustrated, not being able to get films that I wanted to get off the ground, and going, well, if I did a comic, I can literally do everything. I'm both not restrained by a budget to some extent, but I'm also, I don't have to ask for permission. I can make a comic and just, and not even tell anybody about it, right? And, but coming out of, this pandemic year and all of this sort of stuff, I'm aggressively pursuing directing a film. I'm developing multiple projects and aggressively pursuing directing a film.
Good luck with that. And I mean that. Hang on, I'll say that again.
Good luck with that.
Good luck with
that. Yeah. Well, that's probably actually the appropriate response, but I'm still doing it.
Well, all power to you. Which of the directors you've worked with do you think has the best kind of mastery of film language?
I don't know that I can make that call, and certainly everybody is very, very different, and I think it's very subjective. I mean, I think that Christopher Nolan has his very particular thing that he does, and which is it's his signature. There's no question it's a Chris Nolan movie. But there are, I worked with Brian De Palma one time. It was not on a good movie, although apparently if you're a a Brian De Palma cultist. There's a whole wave of people out there who will say that if you don't like Mission to Mars, you don't even like movies or something. But I did work with De Palma on Mission to Mars, and which is terrible. But I did. It is impressive that he has unbelievably specific and certain ideas about how to use the camera and stuff like that. I mean, but I think that it is all, I think that's so subjective. I don't think I could make that call. And it isn't just about not wanting to call out a particular filmmaker. It really is that I feel like, the process is something that is so kind of, complex, and it's making a film's a big giant thing. It's a big thing to accomplish, and there's so many components and parts to it that I think that seeing it from the inside, it's harder to have those kind of clear, broad ideas about a lot of these things, the way that a film studies person will look at a film and contrive these big theories about stuff, and what motivated things and the impact that they're having. But the reality of making a movie is such a messy thing that I don't think that that's something that I think about from that direction.
Yeah, as I said to you before it does. As I said to you before we started talking, and I think since we started recording, that I work in television, and sometimes I'm amazed that we ever get an end.
Yeah,
it's just this, big homogenous mess just pushing forward, particularly in TV. Because, and I guess you guys have deadlines as well, of course, but we have to be on air at this time, and with seconds to go, you don't have the elements, and then you're on air, and then everything happens somehow. Right. I think people on the outside don't really appreciate quite the chaos involved.
And there, I have worked on movies that were. Certainly, one of the movies I worked on was Spider-Man 3 with Sam Raimi. And I know Sam has talked about it not being a movie that quite worked out publicly. And, and it was a big, big mess of a movie. And it was the most expensive movie ever made at the moment. And it was and it was, it was a big, giant mess at every point along the way. And, and ridiculously expensive. And sometimes sometimes that happens. Sometimes things are, the Nolan movies are the most smooth sailing movies I've worked on. They're the only movies that I've worked on where you get a script at the beginning of it, and that's what you're making. Right? It can change a little bit along the way and adapt for all of the regular production reasons. But the fact that you start the movie and there is a script and that is what you're working on is such a novel concept within, my film career, where most of the time I start and there's no script, or I start and there is a script that everybody hates and is being rewritten, or is, the chances that one of these things gets going with a finished set script, which is the thing that will make everything go smoothly for the most part, right? If we're all agreeing on what we're making, then things will go a lot smoother. And his films are very lean. Nolan's films are very lean in a lot of ways, apart from being, they are huge films, but the way they're made is in a little bit more indie of a way, and very, very lean with as few people as possible. So, and generally those have been very orderly, and I will be on the film for the exact same amount of time, every single one, as opposed to others where, I'm on forever. I'm on set all the time. That Spider-Man movie I was on after wrap, just hanging around the office to draw one board when they needed to cut something into the cut, and spending the rest of my time doing other things. It was this process can go all sorts of ways, but it's very likely to be messy. It isn't always, but it certainly can be.
You mentioned that you're on set there. I was going to ask you that, and then I kind of thought, well, no, of course he's not on set. He's there before and after. But you've been on.
No, I've been. I mean, I've certainly been on films. I'm on a movie right now that's shooting. I mean, I'm not there because of COVID stuff. That's shooting in the UK, but I many times I've been on a film. Certainly well into shooting, and you just go to set to meet with the director or whatever, and I've directed a little bit of second unit on things, and but like that Spider-Man movie, I spent like every day on set. Like I was working with, that was me working with previs guys a lot. I was boarding it, but mainly supervising these previs sequences, because that's kind of the way that Sam worked at the time, and kind of assigning somebody to supervise a whole sequence and then develop the previs. But he was very involved in it, and so I'd just be on set trying to get him to look at a cut of the previs like all the time, and be there till and working these like 20-hour days and stuff, and being just on being on set until wrap, and then trying to get to him, and then we go to the editorial, and it's 2 a.m. or whatever, and like but I've spent an enormous amount of time on set, and I'm absolutely fascinated by every aspect of filmmaking. I've never been bored on set. I don't mind, I don't mind being there. I don't mind, I mean, you don't ever want to be someplace where you're getting in the way, but but for the most part, it's, I think making films is fascinating, and I love every aspect of it. At least I'm fascinated by every aspect of it.
Hope you enjoyed my chat there with Gabriel Hardman. I thought there was some quite fun stories in there. Interesting to hear about Chris Nolan's approach, which I think we all knew, but good to hear it from somebody that's worked directly with him. The next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast is in October 2021, and that will be my conversation with editor and all-round good guy Colin Gowdy. Colin was famously part of the team that edited Rogue One, a film that I really do enjoy. I think they really nailed the kind of Star Wars that I wanted to see. Colin's worked on a number of projects since then and before then, a couple with Gareth Edwards, of course, beginning with Monsters, but he's a veteran editor of the BBC as well, and we talk about his career. We spoke for about 2.5 hours a few weeks back. So the next episode will be a condensed version of that. I haven't started editing it yet, so it may end up as 2 episodes, I don't know yet, but it was quite a long one. I was hoping to speak to Randall Dutra, who was an animator on just about everything. RoboCop, Nightmare Before Christmas, Jurassic Park. But unfortunately, he's got some stuff going on at home. But should he find the time, he's still keen to chat. And I wish him and his family well. Just this week, I've also secured a date with Sean Barton for an interview. He was one of the editors on Return of the Jedi and a regular collaborator with Return of the Jedi director Richard Marquand. This is going to be my first in-person interview for this podcast. I know I had my one with Ivor Powell that was in person, but that was when I actually was shooting a video and I used that material for a podcast episode. But this is my first intentional one in person. He hates Zoom that much, Sean, that he has invited me to his home in London, so I'm going to do that in just about a week's time. As I've also mentioned before, Alice Lowe is going to come on too at some point. Rather excited about that one because she's just great. I love her. In the meantime, thanks for listening, and I hope you can join me again for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.